Maria wiped down the last table in the corner of Romano's restaurant as the clock struck 11 p.m. The small Italian restaurant had been her workplace for 3 years, and she knew every corner of the dimly lit dining room. The smell of garlic and herbs still hung in the air from the busy dinner service. Her feet ached in her worn black shoes, but she needed this job desperately. The restaurant was nearly empty except for one customer sitting alone at table 7. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive dark suit that looked like it cost more than Maria made in 6 months. His black hair was perfectly combed back, and his dark eyes seemed to notice everything around him. He had been quietly eating his pasta and drinking wine for the past hour, occasionally checking his phone. Tony Romano, the restaurant owner, emerged from the kitchen with his usual scowl. He was a short, stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and a permanently angry expression. His white chef's coat was stained with sauce, and his face was red from the heat of the kitchen. Tony had inherited the restaurant from his father, but unlike his father, he had no patience for customers or employees. "Maria, what are you doing?" Tony snapped, his voice cutting through the quiet restaurant. "Table 3 still has dishes on it, and you're wasting time over here." Maria looked toward table 3, confused. She had already cleared those dishes 20 minutes ago and had seen Tony take them to the kitchen himself. "Mr. Romano, I already cleared table 3. The dishes are—" "Don't talk back to me!" Tony's voice grew louder, causing the customer at table 7 to look up from his meal. "I'm sick of your attitude. You think you know better than me?" Maria's heart began to race. She had been working extra hours to help her sick mother pay for medical bills, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cleaning cloth. "I'm sorry, Mr. Romano. I just thought—" "You thought? That's your problem. You're paid to work, not to think." Tony stepped closer to her, his breath smelling of the wine he had been drinking in the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, and Maria could tell he had been drinking more than usual. The man at table 7 continued to watch the scene unfold, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. He had the look of someone who was used to observing people, taking in every detail of what was happening. "Please, Mr. Romano, I need this job," Maria whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital bed, about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table, about her younger brother who was counting on her to help pay for his school books. Tony's face grew even redder. "You need this job? Well, maybe you should have thought about that before getting smart with me. You're all the same, you people. Come to this country and think you can tell us how to run our businesses." Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had heard these words before from Tony, but tonight they seemed to hurt more than usual. The stress of her mother's illness, the long hours, and the constant fear of losing her job had worn her down. "I wasn't trying to tell you anything, Mr. Romano. I was just what? Just showing me how much smarter you are than me?" Tony grabbed the cleaning cloth from her hands and threw it on the floor. "Pick that up, and when you're done, clean table 3 again. I don't care if you think you already did it." Maria bent down to pick up the cloth, her hands shaking. As she stood back up, she accidentally bumped into a chair, causing it to scrape against the floor with a loud noise. "Now you're breaking my furniture!" Tony exploded. His face was now purple with anger, and the veins in his neck were standing out. "That's it. I've had enough of your clumsiness and your attitude." The customer at table 7 set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, his full attention now on the confrontation. His dark eyes were cold and calculating as he watched Tony's increasingly aggressive behavior. "Mr. Romano, please, I'll be more careful," Maria pleaded. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Without this job, she wouldn't be able to help her family. Her mother's medication was expensive, and her brother was depending on her to help him finish high school. "More careful? You want to be more careful?" Tony's voice was now a shout that echoed through the empty restaurant. I'll show you what happens when you don't respect your boss. Maria saw Tony's hand coming toward her, but she was too shocked to move. She had never imagined that Tony would actually put his hands on her. In the 3 years she had worked there, he had yelled and been cruel with his words, but he had never been physical. Tony's palm connected with Maria's shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling backward. She lost her balance and fell against the wall, her head hitting the wood paneling with a dull thud. Pain shot through her shoulder and head as she slid down the wall to the floor. "That's what you get for disrespecting me in my own restaurant," Tony snarled, standing over her. "Maybe now you'll learn to keep your mouth shut and do what you're told." Maria sat on the floor, stunned and in pain. She touched the back of her head and felt a small bump forming where it had hit the wall. Her shoulder throbbed and she could already feel it starting to swell. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, not just from the physical pain, but from the humiliation and fear. The man at table 7 slowly stood up from his chair. He was even taller than Maria had thought, probably 6 feet 3 or 4 inches. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to being in control. His expensive suit fit him perfectly, and as he walked across the restaurant floor, his leather shoes made soft clicking sounds on the tile. Tony was so focused on intimidating Maria that he didn't notice the customer approaching until the man cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but with an undertone that made Tony turn around quickly. Tony's angry expression faltered slightly when he saw the customer standing just a few feet away. There was something about the man's presence that made Tony take a step back. "Oh, sorry about that," Tony said, trying to force a smile onto his face. "Just dealing with a problem employee. She's new and doesn't understand how things work around here yet." The man looked down at Maria, who was still sitting on the floor holding her head. Then his dark eyes returned to Tony, and there was something in that gaze that made Tony's false smile disappear completely. "Is that right?" the man asked quietly. "She looks like she's been working here for quite some time. Her uniform is well worn, and she seems to know exactly where everything belongs." Tony shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I mean, she's been here a while, but she still doesn't know her place, if you know what I mean." The man tilted his head slightly, studying Tony like he was examining an interesting but unpleasant insect. "I'm not sure I do know what you mean. Could you explain it to me?" There was something in the man's tone that made Tony realize he was in dangerous territory, but his pride and the alcohol in his system wouldn't let him back down completely. "Look, mister, this is my restaurant, and I'll run it how I see fit. The girl was getting mouthy with me, and sometimes you have to put people in their place." The man nodded slowly, as if he was considering Tony's words very carefully. "Put people in their place. I see." He glanced down at Maria again, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "And you think pushing a woman half your size is the appropriate way to handle a workplace disagreement?" "She's not just any woman," Tony said, his voice getting defensive again. "She's an employee who needs to learn respect." The man smiled then, but it wasn't a warm or friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made smart people very nervous. "Respect. That's an interesting word. Tell me, Mr. Romano. Tony Romano. I own this place. Mr. Romano, tell me, what do you think respect really means?" Tony looked confused by the question. He had expected the customer to either mind his own business or maybe agree with him that employees needed to be kept in line. He hadn't expected to be questioned about philosophy. "Respect means doing what you're told and not talking back," Tony said uncertainly. The man shook his head slowly. "That's not respect, Mr. Romano. That's fear. Respect is something that's earned through treating others with dignity and fairness. What you've just shown here isn't respect at all." Tony's face was starting to turn red again. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but you can't come into my restaurant and lecture me about how to treat my employees." The man reached into his jacket pocket, and Tony tensed up. But instead of whatever Tony was afraid of, the man pulled out a leather wallet. From the wallet, he took out a business card and handed it to Tony. Tony looked at the card, and Maria watched his face go completely white. His hands started to shake slightly as he read whatever was printed on the small piece of paper. "Now you know who I am," the man said quietly, "and I think we need to have a different kind of conversation." Vincent Martelli watched as the color drained from Tony Romano's face. The business card in Tony's trembling hands bore a simple design, black letters on cream paper reading Vincent Marcelli, Private Consulting. But Tony recognized the name. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who Vincent Marcelli was, even if they had never seen him in person. Maria remained on the floor, confused by the sudden change in Tony's behavior. A moment ago, he had been shouting and violent. Now he looked like he might faint. She didn't understand what was written on the card, but she could see that it had completely transformed the situation. "Mr. Marcelli," Tony stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. If I had known you were—" Vincent held up his hand, and Tony immediately fell silent. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Vincent had spent 20 years building his reputation in the city's underground business circles. He was known as a man who solved problems for people, but he was also known as someone who didn't tolerate disrespect or cruelty. "Help her up," Vincent said simply, nodding toward Maria. Tony looked confused for a moment, as if he couldn't understand why he was being asked to help the same woman he had just pushed down. But he quickly moved toward Maria, extending his hand to help her to her feet. Maria hesitated, unsure whether to trust Tony's sudden change in behavior. The same hands that had pushed her were now offering to help her up. She looked at Vincent, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. "It's okay," Vincent said gently. "He's going to help you up, and then he's going to apologize for what he did." Maria accepted Tony's help and slowly got to her feet. Her shoulder still ached, and she felt dizzy from hitting her head, but she was more confused than hurt now. She had never seen Tony back down from anything, and she certainly had never seen him look scared. "I'm sorry," Tony mumbled, not meeting Maria's eyes. "I shouldn't have pushed you." Vincent stepped closer to both of them. "That's a start, but it's not enough. You see, Mr. Romano, I've been coming to this restaurant for 3 months now. I like the food, and I like the quiet atmosphere. But tonight, I learned something very unpleasant about how you treat your employees." Tony's hands were still shaking as he put Vincent's business card in his pocket. "Mr. Marcelli, I was having a bad night. The kitchen was busy, and I've been under a lot of stress lately. I know that's no excuse, but you're right. It's no excuse." Vincent's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the quiet words. "I've been watching you for the past hour. This young woman has been working hard, doing her job well, and treating your customers with respect, including me." Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest. In 3 years of working at Romano's, no one had ever defended her or acknowledged her hard work. She had begun to believe that maybe Tony was right, that maybe she wasn't good enough at her job. Vincent continued. "What I saw tonight tells me a lot about your character, Mr. Romano. A man who would push a woman who can't fight back, a man who would abuse his power over someone who depends on their job to survive. That's not the kind of man I want to do business with." "Do business with?" Tony asked, looking even more confused and frightened. Vincent smiled again, that same cold smile from before. "Oh, yes. You see, I've been considering making an investment in this neighborhood. There are several restaurants I've been looking at, and Romano's was at the top of my list. The location is good, the food is decent, and the rent is reasonable." Tony's eyes widened as he began to understand what Vincent was saying, An investment from Vincent Marcelli could transform his struggling restaurant into the most successful business in the neighborhood. It could also mean protection from the various problems that small business owners faced in the city. But after what I saw tonight, Vincent continued, I'm having serious doubts about your character. How can I trust a man who treats his employees like garbage? How do I know you won't cheat me or my associates? Maria listened to this conversation with growing amazement. She was beginning to understand that this well-dressed customer was someone very important, someone with enough power to make Tony Romano scared. Mr. Marcelli, please, Tony begged. I can change. I can be a better boss. This was just one bad moment. It won't happen again. Vincent looked at Tony for a long moment, then turned to Maria. What do you think, Miss Maria? Maria Gonzalez, she said quietly. Miss Gonzalez, you've been working here for how long? 3 years, sir. And in those 3 years, has Mr. Romano ever treated you with respect and dignity? Maria looked at Tony, who was staring at her with pleading eyes. She thought about all the times he had yelled at her, all the times he had made her feel small and worthless, all the times he had threatened to fire her for tiny mistakes that weren't even mistakes at all. No, sir, she said honestly. He hasn't. Vincent nodded. I thought so. Mr. Romano, it seems like tonight wasn't just one bad moment. It sounds like this is a pattern of behavior. Tony's face went from white to green. He was beginning to realize that his temper and his treatment of Maria might cost him the opportunity of a lifetime. I can change, he repeated desperately. Give me a chance to prove it. Vincent was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider Tony's words. Finally, he spoke. I believe in second chances, Mr. Romano. But second chances have to be earned. They don't just get handed out for free. What do you want me to do? Tony asked quickly. First, Miss Gonzalez needs to see a doctor. That bump on her head could be serious and her shoulder needs to be checked. You're going to pay for all her medical expenses. Tony nodded frantically. Of course. Yes, absolutely. Second, Miss Gonzalez is going to get a raise, a substantial one. She's been working here for 3 years, making this place run smoothly, and she deserves to be compensated fairly for her work. How much of a raise? Tony asked nervously. Vincent looked at Maria. What are you making now, Miss Gonzalez? Maria hesitated. She had never discussed her salary with anyone except Tony, and she was afraid that mentioning it might make things worse somehow. $12 an hour, she said quietly. Vincent's expression darkened. $12 an hour? In this city? For someone with 3 years of experience? He turned back to Tony. That's insulting. She'll be making $18 an hour starting tomorrow. Tony's mouth fell open. A $6 per hour raise for Maria would cost him over $200 extra per week. But he could see in Vincent's eyes that this wasn't a negotiation. Yes, sir, Tony agreed quickly. Third, Vincent continued, you're going to treat Miss Gonzalez and any other employees you have with respect and dignity. You will not yell at them, you will not insult them, and you will certainly never put your hands on them again. I understand, Tony said. Fourth, if I hear that you've gone back to your old ways, if I hear that you've mistreated Miss Gonzalez or anyone else who works for you, then you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. The kind of conversation that usually ends with people losing their businesses. Do you understand me? Tony nodded so hard it looked like his head might fall off. Yes, sir, perfectly clear. Vincent reached into his pocket again and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. Dr. Chen, it's Vincent. I have someone who needs to be seen tonight. A young woman who hit her head and injured her shoulder. Can you meet us at your office in 20 minutes? Maria listened to Vincent arrange for her medical care with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. No one had ever gone to such trouble for her before. She had been planning to just go home and put some ice on her head and hope for the best. After Vincent ended the call, he turned back to Tony. "You're going to drive Miss Gonzalez to Dr. Chen's office and wait while she's examined. You're going to pay the bill, and you're going to make sure she gets home safely afterward." "Of course," Tony agreed immediately. Vincent looked at Maria. "Miss Gonzalez, is there anything else you need? Any other way that Mr. Romano should make up for what he did tonight?" Maria thought about it for a moment. There was one thing that had been bothering her, but she wasn't sure if she should mention it. Finally, she found the courage to speak up. "My mother is in the hospital," she said quietly. "I've been asking Mr. Romano if I could have some time off to visit her more often, but he always says no. He says if I take time off, I might lose my job." Vincent's eyes grew cold again as he looked at Tony. "Is that true, Mr. Romano? You've been preventing this woman from visiting her sick mother?" Tony looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Well, I mean, we're always busy here, and if she takes time off—" "How busy can you be?" Vincent interrupted. "I've been coming here for months, and I've never seen this place full. Half the tables are usually empty." Tony had no answer for that. Vincent turned back to Maria. "Miss Gonzalez, starting tomorrow, you're going to have a flexible schedule. You can arrange your hours so that you can visit your mother as much as you need to. Mr. Romano is going to work around your family obligations, not the other way around." "Thank you," Maria said, tears forming in her eyes again. But this time, they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain and humiliation. Vincent checked his watch. "Dr. Chen is expecting you in 15 minutes. You'd better get going." As Tony hurried to get his car keys, Vincent gently touched Maria's arm. "Miss Gonzalez, I want you to understand something. What happened here tonight was not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Romano was completely out of line." "Thank you for helping me," Maria said. "I don't understand why you did it, but thank you." Vincent smiled, and this time it was a genuine, warm smile. "Let's just say I don't like bullies, and I especially don't like men who think they can push women around just because they have a little bit of power." Tony returned with his keys, looking nervous and eager to please. "Ready to go, Miss Gonzalez?" As they headed toward the door, Vincent called out one last time. "Mr. Romano, remember what we discussed. I'll be checking in from time to make sure you're keeping up your end of our agreement." Tony nodded vigorously. "You won't have any problems with me, Mr. Marcelli. I promise." After they left, Vincent finished his wine and left money on the table that was twice what his meal had cost. As he walked out into the cool night air, he pulled out his phone and made another call. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "I want you to keep an eye on Romano's restaurant. If the owner gives his employees any trouble, I want to know about it immediately." 3 months later, Maria walked into Romano's restaurant with a spring in her step that hadn't been there for years. The morning sun streamed through the front windows, casting a warm glow over the dining room that seemed brighter and more welcoming than it had ever been before. Dr. Chen had found that Maria had suffered a mild concussion and a strained shoulder, but with proper rest and treatment, she had healed completely. More importantly, the changes Vincent Marcelli had demanded that night had transformed not just Maria's life, but the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. Tony Romano was behind the counter reviewing the morning's delivery invoices. When he saw Maria come in, he looked up with what appeared to be a genuine smile. "Good morning, Maria. How's your mother doing?" "She's much better, thank you," Maria replied, hanging up her jacket in the employee closet. "The doctors say she might be able to come home next week." "That's wonderful news. Take whatever time you need to help her get settled at home." Maria still sometimes felt surprised by Tony's changed behavior. The man who had once screamed at her for imaginary mistakes now asked about her family and encouraged her to take time off when she needed it. She knew the change wasn't entirely genuine. Tony was still motivated primarily by fear of Vincent Marcelli, but the results were real enough. The restaurant had prospered over the past 3 months. Word had somehow gotten around the neighborhood that Romano's was under Vincent Marcelli's protection, and business had increased dramatically. Tables that used to sit empty were now filled with customers who knew that eating at Romano's meant they were supporting a business that the powerful Vincent Marcelli approved of. Maria had been able to move her mother to a better hospital with the money from her raise, and her younger brother Carlos was doing well in school. For the first time in years, she wasn't constantly worried about money or job security. At exactly noon, the front door chimed, and Vincent Marcelli walked in for his regular weekly lunch. He had been coming every Tuesday since that night 3 months ago, always sitting at the same table, always ordering the same meal. Maria suspected these visits were his way of checking on the situation without making it obvious. "Good afternoon, Mr. Marcelli," Maria said warmly as she approached his table. "Your usual?" "Please," Vincent said with a smile. "And how are things going, Miss Gonzalez?" "Very well, thank you. Tony has been different. Much better to work for." Vincent nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear it. And your mother?" "She's recovering well. I was able to visit her yesterday afternoon, and she looks stronger than she has in months." "Excellent. Family is the most important thing in life." As Maria went to put in Vincent's order, she noticed 2 men in expensive suits enter the restaurant. They looked around carefully before choosing a table near the back corner. Something about their behavior made Maria feel uneasy, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Vincent had noticed the men, too. His relaxed posture became slightly more alert, though he continued to appear casual to anyone who might be watching. He recognized the type. They had the look of professionals who weren't here for the food. One of the men approached Maria as she was bringing Vincent his water. "Excuse me, miss. We're looking for Vincent Marcelli. Is he here?" Maria glanced toward Vincent's table, unsure how to respond. Vincent caught her eye and gave her a small nod. "He's right over there," Maria said, pointing toward Vincent's table. The man thanked her and walked over to Vincent, his partner following close behind. "Mr. Marcelli, I'm Detective Rodriguez, and this is Detective Thompson. We'd like to ask you a few questions if you don't mind." Vincent gestured to the empty chairs at his table. "Of course, detectives, please, sit down. Can I buy you some coffee?" Detective Rodriguez remained standing. "This is about the Castellano situation from last month. We understand you might have some information that could be helpful to our investigation." Vincent sipped his water calmly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Detective. You'll have to be more specific." Maria tried to focus on her other tables, but she couldn't help overhearing parts of the conversation. The detectives were asking Vincent about some kind of business dispute that had been resolved without involving the police. Vincent's answers were polite but vague, giving the impression that he knew very little about whatever they were investigating. Tony emerged from the kitchen and immediately tensed when he saw the detectives talking to Vincent. His face went pale, and Maria could see his hands shaking slightly as he realized that police attention on Vincent could potentially bring unwanted scrutiny to his restaurant. "Is everything all right?" Tony asked nervously, approaching the table. Detective Thompson looked up at him. "Are you the owner?" "Yes, Tony Romano. This is my restaurant. We're just having a conversation with Mr. Marcelli here. Nothing for you to be concerned about." But Tony was clearly concerned. His mind was racing with worries about what the police presence might mean for his business, especially given his new relationship with Vincent. Vincent seemed to sense Tony's anxiety. "Detectives, I appreciate your thoroughness, but as I've told you, I don't have any information about the matter you're investigating. Mr. Castellano and I resolved our business differences through normal negotiation, just like any other business dispute." Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook. Normal negotiation that resulted in Mr. Castellano suddenly deciding to sell his restaurant and leave the city? People make business decisions for all sorts of reasons, Vincent replied smoothly. Perhaps Mr. Castellano simply decided he was ready for retirement. The detectives asked a few more questions, but it was clear they weren't going to get the answers they wanted from Vincent. After about 10 minutes, they stood up to leave. Mr. Marcelli, if you remember anything that might be helpful to our investigation, please give us a call, Detective Rodriguez said, handing Vincent a business card. Of course, Detective. I'm always happy to cooperate with law enforcement. After the detectives left, the restaurant felt quieter somehow. The other customers had been watching the interaction with curiosity, and it took a few minutes for normal conversation to resume. Vincent finished his lunch in peace, but Maria noticed that he seemed more thoughtful than usual. When she brought him his check, he looked up at her with a serious expression. Miss Gonzalez, I want you to understand something. My business dealings sometimes attract attention from law enforcement. That's just the nature of what I do. But I want to assure you that your job here is secure, regardless of what happens with my other affairs. Maria felt a chill of worry. Is there going to be trouble, Mr. Marcelli? There's always the possibility of trouble in my line of work, Vincent said honestly. But you don't need to worry about it affecting you or this restaurant. Mr. Romano knows better than to let any of my problems become his problems. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Tony appeared at the table. Mr. Marcelli, is everything okay? Those detectives are just doing their job, Vincent finished. Nothing for you to be concerned about, Mr. Romano. Just continue running your restaurant the way you have been for the past 3 months. Tony nodded eagerly. Of course, yes, sir. Everything will continue exactly as it has been. Vincent stood up and left his usual generous tip. As he headed toward the door, he paused and turned back to address the entire restaurant. I want everyone here to know that Romano's restaurant has my complete support and protection, he said in a voice loud enough for all the customers to hear. Tony Romano runs an honest business and treats his employees with respect and dignity. Anyone who has a problem with this restaurant has a problem with me. The message was clear to everyone in the room. Whatever the detectives had been investigating, Vincent was making it known that Romano's restaurant was under his protection and that any trouble for the restaurant would mean trouble for whoever caused it. After Vincent left, Maria noticed that several customers approached Tony to compliment him on the food and service. Word would spread quickly through the neighborhood that Vincent Marcelli had publicly endorsed the restaurant, which would likely bring even more business. Later that afternoon, as Maria was preparing to leave for her visit to the hospital, Tony called her over to the counter. Maria, I want to thank you, he said quietly. Thank me for what, Mr. Romano? If you had acted differently that night 3 months ago, if you had been rude to Mr. Marcelli or made a scene, none of this would have happened. The restaurant is doing better than it ever has, and I know that's partly because of how professionally you handled a very difficult situation. Maria thought about that night and how terrified and humiliated she had felt. I was just trying to do my job. Well, you do it very well. I want you to know that your position here is secure, no matter what happens. And if you ever have any problems, with customers or anyone else, you come to me immediately. As Maria walked to the hospital that afternoon, she reflected on how much her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a frightened, overworked waitress who lived in constant fear of losing her job. Now she was a valued employee with a fair wage, a flexible schedule, and job security. She thought about Vincent Marcelli and wondered what kind of man he really was. The detective's questions had reminded her that his world was complicated and potentially dangerous. But she also knew that without his intervention, she would still be trapped in the same miserable situation. When she reached the hospital, she found her mother sitting up in bed, looking stronger and healthier than she had in months. The better medical care that Maria's rays had made possible was clearly making a difference. "How was work today, Mika?" her mother asked. "Good, Mama. Very good." Maria decided not to mention the detectives or the conversation about Vincent's business troubles. Her mother had enough to worry about with her own health. Instead, she told her about the busy lunch rush and how well the restaurant was doing. As they talked, Maria realized that sometimes life changed in unexpected ways. A moment that had seemed like the worst thing that could happen had actually led to the best job she had ever had. She still didn't fully understand Vincent Marcelli or his world, but she would always be grateful for what he had done for her that night. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over the city. In the distance, Romano's restaurant was preparing for the dinner rush, and Tony Romano was treating his employees with respect and dignity, just as Vincent Marcelli had demanded. And somewhere in the city, Vincent was conducting whatever business had brought those detectives to the restaurant, secure in the knowledge that he had used his power to help someone who couldn't help herself. Maria smiled as she held her mother's hand, finally understanding that sometimes the most important moments in life come from the most unexpected places.